Desmond Doss, the soldier who saved 75 lives without firing a shot. Picture this. You're in the middle of one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. Japanese machine guns are tearing your platoon apart. Artillery shells are exploding all around you. Your friends are screaming in agony, dying in the mud. And then you see him, a soldier running toward the gunfire, not away from it. He's carrying no weapon, no rifle, no pistol, not even a knife. He's completely defenseless. And over the next several hours, while everyone else retreats down the cliff to safety, this one unarmed man lowers 75 wounded soldiers, one by one, down a 400-foot cliff face, using nothing but a rope and his bare hands, all while praying, "Lord, please help me get one more." This is not a movie script. This is not fiction. This is the true story of Desmond Doss, the only conscientious objector to receive the Medal of Honor during World War II. A man who was beaten, mocked, and threatened with court-martial for refusing to touch a weapon. A man whose own officers wanted him kicked out of the army. And yet, this same man became one of the greatest heroes in American military history. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a Seventh-day Adventist from Virginia, who believed killing was a sin, became the soldier his comrades trusted more than anyone else. Stay with me, because Desmond Doss's story will challenge everything you think you know about courage, faith, and what it truly means to be a warrior. Part 1. The Boy with the 10 Commandments. Childhood and Faith. The story of Desmond Thomas Doss begins on February 7th, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. He was born into a deeply divided household, a home where faith and pain lived side by side. Desmond's father, William Thomas Doss, was a carpenter and a veteran of World War I. But the war had broken something inside him. Like so many men who came back from the trenches, William carried invisible wounds. He drank heavily to numb the memories. He had a violent temper that could explode without warning. And when the Great Depression hit in 1929, destroying what little financial stability the family had, William spiraled even deeper into despair and alcoholism. Desmond's mother, Bertha, was the opposite. She was a devout Seventh-day Adventist, a Christian denomination that observed Saturday as the Sabbath and followed strict biblical principles. Bertha took her 3 children, Desmond, his older sister Audrey, and his younger brother Harold, to church every week. She taught them to read the Bible, to pray, and to live by the 10 Commandments. The Doss household was chaotic. William's drinking led to violent arguments. There were nights when young Desmond lay in bed listening to his parents shout at each other, terrified that his father might hurt his mother. On one horrifying occasion, William became so enraged during a fight with Bertha's brother that he pulled out a gun. Desmond, only about 10 years old, watched in terror as his mother wrestled the gun away from his father. She begged Desmond to hide the weapon, and he ran outside and buried it in a secret location. That incident burned itself into Desmond's soul. He had seen his father, consumed by anger and alcohol, nearly commit murder. He had seen how violence destroys families. And from that moment on, Desmond became obsessed with the 6th commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." Hanging on the wall of the Doss home was a framed poster depicting the 10 Commandments. Each commandment was illustrated with a vivid picture. The illustration for "Thou shalt not kill" showed Cain standing over his brother Abel's dead body, blood on his hands, guilt on his face. Young Desmond would stare at that image for hours. He vowed to himself that he would never be like Cain. He would never take a human life. This belief was reinforced by his church. The Seventh-day Adventist faith taught that Christians should be peacemakers, that violence was contrary to the teachings of Jesus Christ, and that the body is a temple that should be kept pure. Desmond absorbed these teachings completely. They became the foundation of his identity. Despite the chaos at home, Desmond was a good kid. He was quiet, hardworking, and deeply compassionate. He loved animals and hated seeing anything suffer. When he saw injured birds or stray dogs, he would nurse them to health. His friends and teachers knew him as gentle and kind. As Desmond grew older, his faith deepened. He attended church services every Saturday without fail. He studied the Bible obsessively. And he became convinced that God had a plan for his life, though he didn't know what it was yet. Then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changed. Part 2. Pearl Harbor and the Decision to Serve. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, America was thrown into chaos. Thousands were dead. The Pacific Fleet was crippled. The nation was at war. Desmond Doss, now 22 years old, was working at the Newport News Naval Shipyard in Virginia. His job was considered essential to the war effort, which meant he was exempt from the draft. He could have stayed home, safe, and no one would have questioned it. But Desmond couldn't do that. He believed deeply in his country. He believed that America was fighting against tyranny and evil. He wanted to serve. But his faith absolutely forbade him from killing another human being. So he came to a decision. He would enlist as a combat medic. As a medic, he could serve his country and save lives without violating his beliefs. It seemed like the perfect solution. In April 1942, Desmond Doss enlisted in the United States Army and was assigned to the Medical Detachment 307th Infantry Regiment, 77th Infantry Division. He reported for basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, excited and hopeful. He had no idea what nightmare awaited him. Part 3. Hell in Boot Camp. Training and Persecution. From the moment Desmond arrived at boot camp, he was targeted. The Army didn't know what to do with him. He refused to carry a weapon. He refused to train with weapons. And he insisted on observing the Sabbath, which meant that he wouldn't drill, march, or work on Saturdays. His fellow soldiers thought he was a coward. His drill instructors thought he was insane. And his commanding officers wanted him gone. The abuse started almost immediately. Soldiers in his barracks called him names: coward, yellow belly, Jesus freak. They mocked him when he knelt beside his bunk to pray every night. Some threw boots at him. Others physically assaulted him, punching and shoving him when the officers weren't looking. They wanted to break him, to force him to quit. But Desmond wouldn't quit. No matter how much they abused him, Desmond remained calm and respectful. He never fought back. He never raised his voice. He simply endured. His commanding officer, Captain Jack Glover, was furious. Glover believed that Desmond was a liability, a man who would get other soldiers killed. He tried everything he could to get Desmond discharged. He assigned him to the most miserable duties: cleaning latrines, peeling potatoes for hours, digging ditches. He hoped Desmond would break and request a transfer. Desmond didn't break. Then Captain Glover took more drastic action. He recommended that Desmond be court-martialed for refusing to touch a weapon. The charge was serious and could result in a dishonorable discharge or even prison time. Desmond was terrified. He didn't want to go to prison, but he also couldn't violate his beliefs. He prayed constantly, asking God for guidance. Then, at the court-martial hearing, something unexpected happened. A senior officer reviewed Desmond's case and made a surprising decision. Desmond would be allowed to continue as a combat medic, but he would be reclassified as a conscientious objector. He would not be required to carry a weapon, but he would have to perform all other duties expected of a soldier. It was a compromise. Desmond accepted it. But the harassment didn't stop. His fellow soldiers still despised him. They still believed he was a coward who would run when the bullets started flying. They wanted nothing to do with him. Then, in 1944, Desmond and his unit shipped out to the Pacific Theater. And everything changed.
Part 4. Proving Himself. Guam and Leyte. Desmond Doss's first taste of combat came on the island of Guam in July 1944. The 77th Infantry Division was tasked with clearing the island of Japanese forces in brutal jungle warfare. It was hot, humid, and terrifying. Snipers lurked in trees. Enemy soldiers hid in caves. Ambushes could happen at any moment. When the fighting started, Desmond's fellow soldiers watched him closely, expecting him to panic or hide. Instead, they saw something they never expected. Desmond ran toward the gunfire. When men were wounded, Desmond was there instantly. He crawled through machine gun fire to reach them. He dragged them to cover, dressed their wounds, administered morphine, and called for stretcher bearers. Bullets whizzed past his head. Explosions threw dirt and shrapnel everywhere. But Desmond never hesitated. The soldiers who had called him a coward began to realize they had been wrong. This man, this gentle, soft-spoken Seventh-day Adventist, had more courage than almost anyone else in the company. During one engagement, several men were pinned down by Japanese fire. No one could reach them. Desmond crawled forward on his belly, completely exposed, and reached the wounded. One by one, he treated them and pulled them back to safety. For this action, Desmond was awarded the Bronze Star for valor. Then the 77th Division was sent to Leyte in the Philippines. The fighting there was even savager. The Japanese fought with fanatical determination, launching banzai charges and ambushes. Casualties were horrific. And once again, Desmond Doss was everywhere. He treated men under fire, carried wounded soldiers on his back, and risked his life repeatedly to save others. He was awarded a second Bronze Star. By now, the men of Company B loved Desmond Doss. They no longer saw him as a coward or a liability. They saw him as the bravest man in the unit. And they knew that if they were wounded, Desmond would come for them, no matter what. That trust would be tested to its absolute limit on a blood-soaked ridge in Okinawa. Part 5. Hacksaw Ridge. The Day of Days. The Battle of Okinawa. In April 1945, the United States launched the invasion of Okinawa, the last major battle before the planned invasion of Japan itself. Okinawa was defended by over 100,000 Japanese soldiers who had spent years fortifying the island with tunnels, bunkers, and hidden artillery positions. The Japanese high command knew that if Okinawa fell, Japan itself would be next. So they decided to fight to the death. The 77th Infantry Division was assigned to capture the Maeda Escarpment, a massive cliff rising 400 feet above the surrounding terrain. The top of the cliff was a plateau, and the Japanese had turned it into a fortress. Machine gun nests, mortars, artillery, and snipers were positioned everywhere. Any American soldier who reached the top was immediately subjected to withering fire. The escarpment was so treacherous and deadly that the American soldiers gave it a nickname, Hacksaw Ridge. On April 2, 1945, Desmond Doss and the men of Company B, along with the survivors of Company A, were ordered to climb Hacksaw Ridge. They used cargo nets to scale the cliff, climbing hand over hand while Japanese soldiers above them fired down at them. It was like climbing into hell. When they reached the top, the plateau was a nightmare. The ground was torn up by artillery. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of death. Japanese soldiers attacked from hidden caves and tunnels. The fighting was savage, hand to hand in some places. Desmond moved through the chaos, treating wounded men. He had removed all markings that identified him as a medic. He knew that the Japanese specifically targeted medics because killing one medic could result in many more Japanese deaths. So Desmond made himself look like any other soldier, except he carried no weapon. For 3 days, the battle raged. Men died by the dozens. The 77th Division clung to their positions on top of the ridge, but just barely. Japanese counterattacks came in waves. Artillery and mortar fire never stopped. Then, on May 5th, 1945, everything went to hell. The Japanese launched a massive counterattack. Artillery, mortar, and machine guns opened up all at once. The Americans were overwhelmed. Casualties mounted rapidly. Over 75 men were killed or wounded within minutes. The order came down, retreat, get off the ridge, fall back. Every American soldier on the plateau began scrambling back toward the cargo nets, desperate to get down the cliff before they were killed. Except one. Desmond Doss refused to leave. Part 6. One more. Lord, the miracle on Hacksaw Ridge. While his entire company retreated down the cliff, Desmond Doss stayed on the plateau. Japanese soldiers were everywhere. Machine gun fire was tearing up the ground. Artillery shells were exploding constantly. But Desmond didn't care. There were 75 wounded American soldiers lying on that plateau. They couldn't move. They couldn't climb down on their own. And if Desmond left them, they would die. So Desmond made a decision. He would save them. All of them. He found a rope and tied it to a sturdy tree stump near the edge of the cliff. Then he ran through the gunfire to the nearest wounded soldier, dragged him back to the edge, tied the rope around him, and lowered him down the 400-foot cliff face to the medics waiting below. Then he did it again, and again, and again. With every trip he prayed, "Lord, please help me get one more. One more wounded man, just one more." Japanese soldiers were shooting at him. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. Shrapnel from explosions tore through the air, but Desmond kept moving. He found a soldier with both legs shattered by machine gun fire. Desmond dragged him across 50 yards of open ground under fire, lowered him down the cliff, and went back for another. He found a soldier with his arm blown off, bleeding to death. Desmond tied a tourniquet, carried him to the edge, lowered him down, and went back for another. He found soldiers with stomach wounds, chest wounds, head wounds. Some were unconscious, some were screaming in agony. Desmond treated each one as best he could, then lowered them to safety. For over 12 hours, Desmond Doss worked without stopping. He didn't eat, he didn't drink, he didn't rest. He just kept praying, "Lord, please help me get one more." By the time dawn broke, every single wounded American soldier had been evacuated from Hacksaw Ridge. Desmond had saved 75 lives. 75 men who would have died if not for his courage. The soldiers at the bottom of the cliff couldn't believe it. How had one unarmed man accomplished this? It seemed impossible. It seemed like a miracle. And maybe it was. Part 7. The Final Wounds. After the evacuation of Hacksaw Ridge, the 77th Division regrouped and continued the fight for Okinawa. Desmond Doss remained with his unit, still treating wounded men, still putting himself in danger.
On May 21, 1945, Desmond was crouched in a shell hole with two other soldiers during a night raid when a Japanese grenade landed at his feet. Desmond tried to kick it away, but it exploded. Shrapnel tore into his legs and lower body. The pain was excruciating. Desmond treated his own wounds as best he could, wrapping tourniquets around his legs to stop the bleeding. Then he waited. For 5 hours, he lay in that shell hole, bleeding in agony, while Japanese soldiers searched for survivors nearby. Finally, stretcher bearers reached him and began carrying him back to the aid station. But as they moved through the darkness, they came under attack from a Japanese tank. Machine gun fire raked the area. One of the stretcher bearers shouted that another soldier nearby had been hit and was more critically wounded than Desmond. Desmond, bleeding and in agony, rolled off the stretcher and told the bearers, "Take him first." The bearers carried the other soldier to safety. Desmond waited, alone, in the darkness. Then, as he tried to crawl toward the aid station on his own, a Japanese sniper shot him. The bullet shattered his left arm. Desmond was now critically wounded in both legs and one arm. He was losing blood fast, but he refused to give up. He found a discarded rifle stock, used it to splint his shattered arm, and crawled 300 yards over rough terrain to reach the aid station. He survived. Barely. Desmond was evacuated to a hospital ship, then back to the United States. Surgeons removed 17 pieces of shrapnel from his body and worked to save his arm, but the damage was severe. Desmond would never fully recover. Part 8. The Medal of Honor and the Cost of Heroism. On October 12, 1945, Desmond Doss stood on the White House lawn in Washington, D.C. President Harry S. Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. Truman shook Desmond's hand and said, "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." Desmond Doss was the first conscientious objector in American history to receive the Medal of Honor. But the cost had been enormous. Desmond's injuries never fully healed. He had lost significant use of his left arm. His legs caused him constant pain. And worse, during his time in military hospitals, he contracted tuberculosis. The disease ravaged his body. Doctors were forced to remove his left lung and 5 of his ribs. For the rest of his life, Desmond survived on a single lung. He also suffered from severe hearing loss caused by the artillery explosions on Okinawa. He was partially deaf for the rest of his life. Despite all this, Desmond never complained. He never expressed regret. When asked if he would do it again, he always said yes. Saving lives was the most rewarding work he could imagine. Desmond married his sweetheart, Dorothy, and they had one son, Desmond Jr. He worked various jobs despite his disabilities and remained active in his church. He spoke to groups about his experiences, always emphasizing that his faith had sustained him. In 1991, Dorothy died of cancer. Desmond was heartbroken. Several years later, he remarried to Frances Doss, who cared for him as his health continued to decline. In his final years, Desmond struggled with breathing problems and other complications from his old wounds. On March 23, 2006, at the age of 87, Desmond Thomas Doss passed away from respiratory failure. He was buried with full military honors at Chattanooga National Cemetery in Tennessee. Part 9. The Legacy of Desmond Doss. Desmond Doss's story remained relatively unknown for decades, but in 2004, a documentary called The Conscientious Objector brought his story to a wider audience. Then, in 2016, director Mel Gibson released Hacksaw Ridge, a feature film starring Andrew Garfield as Desmond. The film was a massive critical and commercial success, earning 6 Academy Award nominations and winning 2 Oscars. Suddenly, Desmond Doss's story was known around the world. Military installations, schools, and hospitals were named in his honor. The Desmond Doss Health Clinic at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii honors his legacy. A plaque commemorates his childhood home in Lynchburg, Virginia, which now serves as a shelter for homeless veterans. But Desmond's greatest legacy is the lesson he taught: that courage doesn't require violence, that faith and duty can coexist, that one person, driven by conviction and compassion, can save countless lives. Conclusion: the unarmed warrior. Desmond Doss never fired a shot in anger. He never killed an enemy soldier. He never even carried a weapon. But he saved 75 lives on Hacksaw Ridge. He earned 2 Bronze Stars and a Medal of Honor. And the men who once mocked him as a coward came to love him as the bravest soldier they ever knew. Captain Jack Glover, the officer who had tried to court-martial Desmond and kick him out of the Army, later said, "He was one of the bravest persons alive." And then to have him end up saving my life was the irony of the whole thing. Desmond Doss proved that heroism comes in many forms. You don't need a weapon to be a warrior. You don't need to kill to serve your country. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is choosing to save lives instead of taking them. Desmond's favorite Bible verse was from the Gospel of John. "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for his friends." Desmond Doss lived that verse every day on Hacksaw Ridge, and in doing so, he became one of the greatest heroes in American history. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share this video.
Tomorrow, we'll bring you 3 more incredible stories of warriors whose courage changed history. Until then, remember Desmond Doss's prayer. Lord, please help me get one more.